What you're about to hear is not fiction. It's not a horror movie. It's the true story of 5 young women whose names became synonymous with evil, and the day an entire city gathered to watch them die. July 4th, 1946, Gdansk, Poland. As America celebrated Independence Day with fireworks and parades, something far more sinister was unfolding on a hill called Biskupia Gorka. Up to 200,000 people, men, women, and children, had gathered for what would become one of the most controversial public executions in post-war history. But this story doesn't begin on that hill. It begins in the frozen swamps of northern Poland, in a place where humanity went to die. Stutthof concentration camp. Welcome to World War II-pedia, where we uncover the stories they don't want you to know. Picture this: September 1939. While the world watched Hitler's war machine tear through Poland, construction crews were already building what would become the first concentration camp established outside Germany's borders. Hidden in marshlands, surrounded by impenetrable forests, Stutthof was designed to be inescapable. The Nazis had a plan. Lists had been prepared, thousands of names of Polish intellectuals, priests, politicians, and artists. Anyone who could inspire resistance, anyone who could keep Polish culture alive. They called it intelligence action, the systematic murder of Poland's educated elite. Within weeks, 6,000 souls were trapped behind Stutthof's barbed wire. But this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume 110,000 lives over 6 horrific years. As the war raged on, Stutthof transformed into something even more monstrous. Jewish families torn from their homes across Nazi-occupied Europe were crammed into cattle cars and shipped to this hellish outpost. What awaited them was beyond human comprehension. Imagine being so hungry that you'd fight over a single potato peel. Imagine watching your children waste away while being forced to manufacture weapons for the very regime destroying your people. Imagine the terror of daily selections, where guards would point left or right, deciding who lived another day and who would be marched to the gas chambers. But here's where our story takes a truly chilling turn, because among the SS guards inflicting this torture were 5 young women whose cruelty would shock even hardened Nazi officers. Meet Jenny-Wanda Barkmann, 24 years old, beautiful, charming. The prisoners called her the beautiful specter, because death had never looked so lovely. Barkmann didn't just follow orders, she reveled in them. She would select prisoners for execution with the casual indifference of choosing what to wear. Witnesses later testified that she seemed to enjoy the power, the fear in their eyes, the absolute control over life and death. Then there was Elisabeth Becker, barely 23. While other young women her age were falling in love and planning futures, Becker was perfecting the art of human selection. She would walk the lines of starving prisoners, pointing at the weak, the sick, the exhausted, sending them to their deaths in the gas chambers with a simple gesture. Wanda Klaff, 24, took a different approach to evil. She was methodical, systematic. During her trial, she would later actually boast, about beating at least 2 prisoners every single day. Not because they had done anything wrong, but because she could. Because in Stutthof, she was God. Ewa Paradies, 25, specialized in psychological torture. Picture this horror. In the depths of Polish winter, with temperatures plummeting below freezing, Paradies would force groups of prisoners to strip naked in the snow. Then she would douse them with ice-cold water and watch them slowly freeze. If anyone moved, if anyone tried to warm themselves, she would beat them unconscious. And finally, Gerda Steinhoff, 24. She worked across multiple camps, perfecting her techniques of cruelty. Survivors described her as having dead eyes, as if she had surrendered her humanity completely to the Nazi machine. But there was a 6th woman, Erna Baylart. Her story would prove that even in the darkest places, some flicker of conscience could survive. As the Third Reich crumbled in early 1945, Stutthof's commanders knew the end was near. In a final act of barbarism, they forced 25,000 prisoners, already starving, sick, and broken, on death marches through the frozen Polish countryside. 25,000 human beings, walking hundreds of miles in sub-zero temperatures with no food, no shelter, no hope. Most never made it. They collapsed in the snow and were left to die. Others were shot by guards when they could no longer walk. The lucky ones died quickly. When Soviet forces finally liberated Stutthof on May 9, 1945, they found fewer than 100 survivors hiding in the ruins. 100 people out of 110,000 who had passed through those gates. But this story isn't over, because the world was watching, and the world demanded justice. The hunt began immediately. Allied forces scoured Europe for Stutthof personnel. They found 72 SS officers and 6 female guards. In 1946, they were brought to trial in what would become known as the First Stutthof trial. The courtroom scenes were surreal. As Holocaust survivors took the stand, describing unimaginable horrors, the defendants sat unmoved. Jenny Barkmann was seen fixing her hair, smiling, even flirting with the guards. She showed no remorse, no recognition of the evil she had perpetrated. The only exception was Erna Behlert. Trembling, terrified, she told the court, "I was affiliated with the National Socialist Party since 1933. I liked the Führer's idea that we would be a dominant nation, but I never liked my job. The prisoners were tormented too much. I had to look the other way." The evidence was overwhelming. Survivor after survivor testified to the systematic cruelty of these women. The court had no choice. Erna Behlert, who had resigned after 6 weeks and spent the rest of the war tending to wounded soldiers, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The other 5 were sentenced to death. July 4, 1946, Biskupia Gorka Hill near Gdansk. As dawn broke over Poland, something unprecedented was about to unfold. Word had spread throughout the region. The female guards of Stutthof, the women who had tortured and murdered thousands, were going to hang, and it would be public. They came by the thousands. Survivors of the camps, families of victims, curious onlookers, people who had suffered under Nazi occupation and wanted to see justice served. Conservative estimates put the crowd at 20,000. Some historians believe it may have been as many as 200,000 people. The execution method chosen was deliberately brutal. No quick drop to break the neck, no merciful end. Instead, the condemned would be slowly strangled, the same agonizing death they had inflicted on countless prisoners. Large gallows were constructed on the hill, but the executioners had a different plan. Trucks were positioned beneath the gallows. Nooses were placed around the necks of the condemned and tied to the vehicles. Jenny Barkmann was first. Even facing death, she remained defiant. Her last words, spoken to the massive crowd, were chilling. "Life is a pleasure, and that is why it ends quickly." The truck lurched forward. Barkmann's body was yanked into the air, her feet frantically kicking as the noose tightened around her throat. The crowd watched in silence as the beautiful specter slowly strangled to death. One by one, the other women followed. Elisabeth Becker, who had selected thousands for the gas chambers. Wanda Klaff, who boasted of her daily beatings. Ewa Paradies, who had frozen prisoners in the snow. Gerda Steinhoff, with her dead eyes and systematic cruelty. Each death was slow, agonizing. The crowd watched as these women experienced a fraction of the terror they had inflicted on others. But the executions didn't end there. 6 male SS guards were also hanged that day, their bodies left swaying in the wind as a warning to anyone who might follow in their footsteps. The aftermath was immediate and controversial. Official photographers documented everything, but the images were so disturbing that many newspapers refused to publish them. The sheer scale of the crowd, the public nature of the executions, the visible suffering of the condemned, it all raised uncomfortable questions about justice versus revenge. Polish authorities, shaken by the spectacle they had created, made a decision. There would be no more public executions. The sight of 200,000 people watching 5 women die had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But for the survivors of Stutthof, for the families of the 110,000 who died in that frozen hell, justice had finally been served. The women who had turned cruelty into an art form, who had found pleasure in others' pain, who had abandoned their humanity for Nazi ideology, they had paid the ultimate price. Today, Stutthof stands as a memorial. Visitors can walk through the barracks where 110,000 people that suffered and died. They can see the gas chambers where Jewish families breathed their last breaths. They can stand where 5 young women chose evil over humanity, and where they finally face the consequences of that choice. The story of the Stutthof executions reminds us that evil often wears a human face, that ordinary people can become monsters, and that sometimes justice comes not from courts or judges, but from the collective will of those who refuse to let evil go unpunished. This has been another Untold story from World War II. We are World War IIpedia, where we uncover the hidden truths of history's darkest chapter. Subscribe for more stories that the world tried to forget. And remember, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it.